Now, hello, sweet baby angels and pumpkin heads. It is your girl, Miss Tetra Resin Stone, and you guys, I came across a tweet, and essentially the girl was encouraging us to go educate ourselves and encouraging us to learn a little bit more about Black history, and that don't expect your Black friends to tell you what's going on. So I went and looked up an article that Miss Tiffany Mitchell Patterson, a educator, wrote, and I want to share it with you guys. I think it's fantastic. Now, I'll never forget a student's response when I asked during a middle school social studies class what they knew about Black history. Martin Luther King freed the slaves. Martin Luther King Jr. was born in 1929, more than 6 decades after the time of enslavement. To me, this comment underscored how closely Americans associate Black history with slavery. While shocked, I knew this mistake in belief reflected the lack of time, depth, and breadth schools devote to Black history. Most students get limited information and context about what African Americans have experienced since our ancestors arrived here 4 centuries ago. Without independent study, most adults aren't even up to speed either. For instance, what do you know about Reconstruction? I'm excited for these new resources for teaching children and everyone else more about the history of slavery through the New York Times 1619 Project. But based on my experience teaching social studies and my current work preparing social studies educators, I also consider understanding what happened during the Reconstruction essential for exploring Black power, resilience, and excellence. During that complex period after the Civil War, African Americans gained political power yet faced the backlash of white supremacy and racial violence. I share the concerns many writers, historians, and other scholars are raising about the shortcomings of what school children traditionally learn about Reconstruction in school. Here are some suggestions for educators and others interested in learning more about the time period. Reconstruction Amendments. As most students do learn, the U.S. gained 3 constitutional amendments that extended civil and political rights to newly freed African Americans following the Civil War. The 13th, ratified in 1865, banned slavery and involuntary servitude except for the punishment of a crime. The 14th, ratified 3 years later, granted citizenship for equal protection under the law for all people born in the United States, as well as naturalized citizens, including all previously enslaved individuals. Then, the 15th Amendment asserted that neither the federal government nor state government could deny voting rights to any male citizen. The year 2020 marks the 150th anniversary of the ratification of the 15th Amendment on February 3rd, 1870. The anniversary is a good opportunity to learn about how the amendment was supposed to guarantee that the right to vote could not be denied based on race, color, or previous condition of servitude. African American politicians. What few history and social studies classes explore is how these changes to the Constitution made it possible for African Americans to use their newfound political power to gain representation. Herman Rhodes reveals that the first African American senator represented Mississippi in 1870 after the state's Senate elected him. He was among the 16 Black men from 7 southern states who served in Congress during Reconstruction. Rebels and his colleagues were only part of the story. All told, about 2,000 African Americans held public office at some level of government during Reconstruction. White supremacist groups like the Ku Klux Klan also formed following the Civil War. These terrorist groups engaged in violence and other racist tactics to intimidate African Americans, people of color, Black voters, and legislators. They thus made the accomplishments of African American politicians even more impressive as they served as public officials under the constant threat of racial violence. Black activist women. African American women technically gained the right to vote in 1920 when the 19th Amendment passed. However, the Constitution right limited in many states due to discriminatory laws. Many Black women were activists and women's suffrage movement leaders through public speaking, prolific writing, and developing organizations dedicated to racial and gender equality. They fought for equal rights and dignity for all. Among the Black women who were activists during Reconstruction were the 5 Rollins sisters of South Carolina who fought for female voting rights. Maria Stewart, an outspoken abolitionist before the Civil War and suffragist once it ended, and Mary Ann Shadd Cary, the first Black woman in North America to edit and publish a newspaper, one of the first Black female lawyers in the country, and an advocate for granting women the right to vote. Other women of color who played key roles in the suffrage movement included Ida B. Wells, the journalist and civil rights advocate who raised awareness of lynching, and Mary Church Terrell founded the National Association of Colored Women. Higher education. Before the Civil War, many states made teaching enslaved individuals to read a crime. Education quickly became a top priority for Black Americans once slavery ended. While Northern, largely white philanthropists and missionary groups and the U.S. Bureau of Refugees, Freedmen, and Abandoned Lands, better known as the Freedmen's Bureau, did help create new educational opportunities. The African Americans' public schools established after the Civil War ended were largely built and staffed by the Black community. Many new institutions of higher education, now called historically Black colleges and universities, or HBCUs, began to operate during Reconstruction. These schools trained Black people to become teachers and ministers, doctors and nurses. They also prepared African Americans for careers in industrial and agricultural fields. Public and private HBCUs founded during Reconstruction and still operating today include Harvard University in Washington, D.C., Hampton University in Virginia, Alabama State University, Morehouse College in Georgia, and Morgan State University in Maryland. These colleges and universities train a disproportionate share of Black doctors and other professionals even today. Historical experiences. Storytelling, multimedia experiences, and trips to historic sites and creative museums help get people of any age interested in learning about history. Depending on where you live, you may want to embark on a family outing or school field trip. The National Constitution Center in Philadelphia has a new permanent exhibit on the Civil War and Reconstruction. The National Museum of African American History and Culture, which opened in Washington, D.C. in 2017, contains artifacts from the Reconstruction era, and also making the records of the Freedmen's Bureau, including the names of formerly enslaved individuals following the Civil War, available online. Another option is the Reconstruction era National Historic Park in Beaufort County, South Carolina. I also recommend watching the PBS documentaries about Reconstruction by the scholar and filmmaker Henry Louis Gates Jr., and reading the young adult book Gates co-authored with children's nonfiction writer Tanya Bowden about the era. Gates has also compiled a Reconstruction reading list for adults. In addition, the organization Teaching for Change curates a book list on Reconstruction for middle and high school students. And the Zen Education Project Teach Reconstruction campaign offers a variety of resources, including readings, primary sources, and even lesson plans. An incomplete transition, as the renowned Black scholar W.E.B. Du Bois observed, racist laws and violent tactics in many states actively limited Black freedom. The slave went free, stood for a brief moment in the sun, then moved back again toward slavery. He explained, "This was by no means voluntarily. Intimidated and threatened by Black enfranchisement and excellence in the era of Reconstruction, white supremacists attempted to enforce subordination through violence such as lynching, and in systematic ways through Jim Crow laws. African Americans continued to assert their civil and constitutional rights as activists, politicians, business owners, teachers, and farmers in the midst of the white supremacist backlash. With the latest voter suppression efforts restricting access to the ballot box for voters of color and the resurgence of racist violence and vitriol today, Du Bois' words sound eerily familiar. At the same time, it's reassuring to recall how quickly formerly enslaved African Americans made their way to schoolhouses and public offices. Tiffany Mitchell Patterson is an assistant professor of secondary social studies at West Virginia University. Dr. Tiffany Mitchell Patterson can be found online. I will definitely be linking her Twitter profile in my description box. Please go give her a follow. She is extremely bright. She is very versed and very knowledgeable about Black history and about, the importance of educating ourselves. I definitely got a lot out of this particular article. I hope you guys learned something. One of my biggest takeaways that I learned that I had not known was the 2,000 African Americans held public office during the Reconstruction period. And ultimately what this really opened my eyes to was the fact that I feel a bit let down from the public school system that I went through, because growing up, we didn't really spend a lot of time on Black history. And even just the name Black history, there's this Black history is only for the Black community, or Black history is only for Black people. And that's not true. That's not the case. Black history is America's history. And it's something that we all should learn and we all should know. And on that note, please, once again, go check out the description box below and click on some of the links that I have listed there for you. As well, don't forget to take a moment to go follow Miss Tiffany Mitchell Patterson, Dr. Darling, Assistant Professor of Secondary Social Studies at West Virginia University. Until next time, I will see you in my next video. Bye.